And so I'm just going to answer a few of your questions because some of them will take us where we want to go. There was a question that was asking for a description of my own daily life, which there is no description at this point, because for the last few years, at the suggestion of Swami Kriyananda, I have been, to use his words, traveling as much as I can, because I want to just share what's been so meaningful to me. And it's been a very good exercise for this reason, that I am so often now outside of any little pattern that I could set up. You know how we all set up these little patterns. And I've lived in the same community for 35 years, and I moved once and I moved about 10 yards. So I'm pretty solid in the same spot. But what I've been able to find in these years that I'm traveling is that all we ever have is who we are inside. And so my daily life has become a matter of moment to moment response, because who we are tomorrow is what we have created today. And if we consistently respond to life in such a way that we affirm limitation and sadness, we get to have it. And that's a little tricky, because a great many things happen in life that make us terribly sad. And one of the other questions that was asked here is, how do you overcome grief? The specific question was, the death of a parent, someone we've come to rely on. And of course, parents were there from the very start. We've always had a mother, we've always had a father, and we literally cannot imagine life without them, because they've always been part of it. And then, for reasons I do not understand, God has created a universe in which loss is inevitable, isn't it so? So the question partly is, do we think that human physical death is the end of everything, or is there an ongoing story? I have no simple answers for this. There's nothing I can say to you that is sincere, that says these aren't very, very difficult experiences. So I asked Swami Kriyananda once a very complicated question about, in a very difficult situation, all imaginary in my mind, but what would be the right thing to do? And it was like, if somebody's being hurt in front of me and I really wouldn't have the power to save them, but should I try to save them anyway? And his answer was very interesting. He said, what you're actually asking is, would God want you to do? What would your higher self want you to do? However you want to phrase this. I can just say, what would Divine Mother want me to do? But you're also asking, what is my highest potential in this situation? What action would uplift me the most? What action would create the right energy in my chakras that would bring my energy pattern into a greater and greater positive? Because sometimes sacrificing yourself is the most noble and uplifting thing you can do. How many parents, when their children are suffering, pray to take the misery upon themselves? And how rarely it actually happens. But even the willingness to do that is a sign of ever greater awareness of where true happiness comes from. So either the experiences that we go through, and these very difficult, heartbreaking experiences, either are meaningless, or else they're divine lessons giving us an opportunity to become finer and better and stronger and more beneficial human beings. About, many years ago now, in the mid 80s, I and a few of my friends started a small enterprise where every year or so we would take about 30 Americans on a pilgrimage trip to India. And that was before India's more recent enormous economic miracle. And most of the people in the group almost always were Americans. Almost always they had never been out of a developed Western country. And taking them to India, especially in those early trips, was a real experience. They saw beggars, they saw sick people, they saw, poverty. At that time, also in India, there was no mid-range hotels. There were just very simple hotels for the Indian people and super high-end five-star hotels, which was kind of unfortunate for me because I developed a great affection for luxury hotels, which is way outside my economic range. It's the one great attachment I have to the material world is five-star Indian hotels, but that's off to the side. But we're staying in the Oberoi Grand in Calcutta, which is very well named. And I'm up on the 7th floor in this, extraordinary palace-like place to my little experience. And there's a family living on the sidewalk. And there for 5 days, I could watch the family just outside, looking down on the window. So it was a study in contrast. Over 20 years of taking those groups, different people each time almost, I began to notice that people had very different responses to what they perceived as the suffering of others. Very, very different. Some were completely at ease. They'd chat with the people living on the sidewalk, they'd give money to the beggars or not. They'd discuss with the people. They were completely at ease. Others were totally unhinged by it, to the point where we'd have to make a little coterie of people and protect them just when we go out on the sidewalks. And I began to wonder, what's the difference here? Because it was people all had the same experiences. What I came to understand, both from watching them and watching me, if you have paid attention in your own life and realized that sometimes the hardest things that happen to you are the ones that give you the gifts that you would never have gotten in any other way. If you have become reconciled to the beneficial necessity for suffering in order to grow, then when you see other people, what you think of as suffering, and objectively you can call it that, but you realize it's a pathway to freedom. But that can't be just theoretical. That can't be somebody telling you, some religious dogma that tells you it's okay. You have to feel it in your own heart. Then I ask a different question, and this is for myself and for the people that I love. If there is, and you have to answer this question yourself, if this world is really guided by the Comforter, if there really is a loving Divine Mother, which is to say, an infinite love, an infinite unconditional love that is working for your own best interest, would a loving mother give you those experiences if they weren't going to help you? If those experiences are the necessary pathway to freedom, to courage, to confidence, and ultimately to unconditional joy, would you not want it to happen? Would you want your friends and your children and your parents and your loved ones to not become free? Do you want them to just get to stay exactly as they are and never learn anything? And if this is the way they're going to learn it, how can that be wrong? But you see how very challenging that is? Which is why there's a very, relatively speaking to the population of Tokyo, very small group of people in this room. I never try to persuade anyone of this way of looking at life. But if it begins to make sense to you, and you begin to feel there has to be an answer here, because otherwise this world we live in is literally unbearable. And so when I asked Swamiji, what should I do? And he answered me, well, what you're asking, he said, is in a moment of crisis, how will you be able to feel intuitively what the highest course is for you? Because I didn't realize that was my question. I was being very specific. If this happens, then that happens. If this happens, then that happens. And he had this way of taking what seemed like an obvious situation, he would just pull it to a completely different level. So he brought it to there. The only way you can know, he said, in a moment of intense crisis is if you have practiced every day when it was easier. Yeah. So every one of us knows that sooner or later something of challenge will happen to us. So what are we doing in the meantime? A woman friend of me came and she was an acquaintance, and she came to me for counseling, and she had a very, very difficult mother. And she was very angry at her mother. She was by now a grown woman on her own, but she was still very angry at her mother. And quite honestly, she had good reason to be angry at her mother. I couldn't really say, oh, she was really nice. You just misunderstood. She wasn't. This happens. I'm sure none of you are like this, but she had a mother like that. But she was really angry. That was what she was holding. And what I said to her, what I have observed, is whatever is our biggest issue is also a little issue. It's just what we don't think it matters here, but it matters here. And I'll explain that a little better in a moment. And I said, your response to this disappointment and so on is anger. Do you ever get angry about anything else? Oh, no, she said. No, I never do. I knew her well enough to know that wasn't quite true. I said, well, what about that time the woman in your office did something that you really didn't like? Oh, well, yeah, that. And what happened about that time you were driving on the highway and some driver was really stupid and you were yelling out the window? Yeah, there was also that, And my suggestion to her was this. I said, you can't deal with your mother. It's too much. I said, but what's happened is your response to life when you're disappointed is to become angry. And you need to start dismantling it every place that you can. You have to practice when it's easier. As simple as that. I have a quick fuse, and unfortunately, words come to me faster than intelligence at times. Things happen. The laugh is from a man I know very well, and I know why he's laughing. Because I do, just bing, like that. It just comes out of me too fast. I work on it all the time. And you should have seen me 25 years ago, is all I can say. So once your father has died, or once you've been betrayed by somebody you've trusted, or once your body gives you a terminal illness, or once something that you absolutely wanted to have happen just clearly is never going to happen. That's a little late in the game because you've set up a lot of patterns here. And these patterns, they're called vrittis, chakras, whirlpools, and that they have energy. And they set up energy like this. This is what you're working with here. Your energy runs up the spine, and we want it to be guided from the spiritual eye, because this is our individuality in tune with our higher self. But it has to go through, the energy has to go through all of these chakras, all of these whirlpools, all of these centers in which there are these whirlpools. Think of it like a river. The river is going to get to the ocean because that's what rivers do. And we are going to get to infinite awareness because that's what human beings do. But to get to the ocean, the river has to just keep driving like that. And what happens is a lot of junk falls into the river. You know, somebody has an old car they don't want anymore, they throw it in the river. Somebody has a broken refrigerator, they throw it in the river. Somebody has a lot of garbage, they throw it in the river. And pretty soon, a lot of the river is stuck like this. And so it's trying to flow to the sea, but some of it just keeps getting sucked over. That's a vritti. So we're trying to be noble. We're trying to be forgiving, but we've also thrown a lot of junk into the river, and that's in this incarnation and in the incarnations before. I know it's very depressing. So there's several ways to do this. One is we can try to understand what we've thrown into the river, but after a certain point, and it is helpful to know, wow, there's a whole refrigerator in there, and I never knew I put it in. You know, wow, I really am an angry person. I didn't know that I was an angry person. I used to be very afraid of conflict. And so I had a very nice personality. But I didn't really have a nice personality. I was just afraid of conflict. So I looked good, but what I was building inside, you see, was quite different. So we have to be absolutely authentic. You can't cheat the system. So we can find out who we are, which is very helpful. And then we can fight the battle in every small way that we can so that we can begin to dismantle. And then simultaneously, you increase the flow of the river. This is what yoga postures help do. This is what meditation does. This is what affirmations do. Pay attention to what you're bringing into your life. The kind of music you bring into your life, the kind of entertainment you bring into your life, what you read, who you associate with, because all of that gradually makes you who you are. So by the time something profound happens, it just tells you, oh, look, I've allowed myself to believe that I have to have these certain things or else I won't be, confident and courageous. And so we can be profoundly grateful if we've had relations of any kind that are so beautiful and so important to us that our hearts are broken when they're gone. But if Divine Mother could make you free and unconditionally happy by any other route, don't you think she would take you by that route? So the question you have to ask is not what has happened to me, but Divine Mother, what are you trying to teach me? And then you can say, and help me to learn it. And then you can add, and please soon, because that's the whole point. And we also have to understand when your heart breaks, it mends, but you can always see the crack. But it has the potential to make you so much kinder and so much more compassionate and so much more patient and so much more helpful oh, well, gee, maybe that's why these things happen, huh? Once we learn the enormous positive benefit of suffering, then our whole relationship to it becomes different. When I was going to say about my daily life is a minute by minute effort, some of which succeeds and some of which doesn't, to respond rather than to react, and to respond in such a way that I am, well, in my case, then I'm a credit to my teachers. But in other words, of just saying that I am who I'm trying to be. And then it's a moment by moment opportunity to realize I'm not there yet, which is as important. How you deal with lack of success is one of the most important things you have to learn to be successful, which is, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, didn't it? Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. And just to be, well, the word is humble. I mean, one of the most prized qualities in every spiritual tradition is humility. A friend of mine did something very foolish, and it caused a great deal of difficulty for Swami Kriyananda. I no longer remember the details, but she was very indiscreet in something she said, and there was a huge kerfuffle that happened after that. And about 2 weeks later, my friend was still moping around. And finally, Swamiji said to her, what's wrong with you? Why are you so down all the time? Oh, she said, I feel so badly because of what I did. And his response was, you're so shocked that you could make a mistake that 2 weeks later you're still worshiping it? He said like that. Of course we make mistakes. Why should we be so shocked? Of course, when something hard happens to us, our heart breaks and it takes us time to recover. This is part of increasing awareness. I just didn't know I was so vulnerable. I never knew how attached I was. Okay, now we know. There was this person that I had a lot of trouble getting along with. And then by the grace of God, I used to see her really often. And then by the grace of God, I didn't see her very often. And when she was far away, her good qualities, I was more aware of her good qualities. I began to forget about her bad qualities. So much so that a group of us went on a holiday together. And I was so confident I offered to share a facility with her, not a room, but wherever we were staying. It took me about 15 minutes to lose all affection for her again. Just in no time at all, I was upset with her as I had ever been. And I was talking to Swami, I was actually crying. Oh, I thought I had learned. I thought I had gotten better, but I haven't. He says, well, that's the good news. And I thought, what a goofy thing to say. I'm here telling you that I'm a total failure. He said, well, because you thought you were free, and now you know you aren't. And so you weren't making any effort to improve yourself. He said, and now you know you have a long way to go. So you see, it's not a great deal of courage, which is part of what we're talking about. It's just to say, well, not yet. Not yet. Why am I so shocked? I have another little thing that I love, which is ultimately, eventually, in some incarnation not too far away, we will overcome all our shortcomings and we will be free. This is what it is to become enlightened spiritually, and that is our destiny. And that enlightenment is infinite. Delusion is finite, which means I might make the same mistake 1,000,000 times, but I'm only going to make it 1,000,000 times. And so every time I do, that's one less. Just like that, just one less. So I've just checked that one off, because And the question is here also is, how do I change? How do I actually change my thoughts? You do it one at a time. Yogananda said, take care of the minutes, and the incarnations will take care of themselves. And so there's the fun of this is that there's never a minute that isn't a contributing factor. You don't have to just wait till you're sitting in your meditation room or going to the yoga studio or, serving the poor or whatever it is. Every minute, it's like, am I in this minute consciously attuning myself to the infinite potential for joy? Or am I letting my mind go like this? There's a very good book, I don't know if it's been translated into Japanese, written by a man named Michael Singer, who's actually a disciple of Yogananda. The second book was The Surrender Experiment. First one, I can't remember. Maybe that's the first one. Doesn't matter. I just want to give him credit for this idea. This is what he said. In your mind, if you think about it, there's always two things going on. Somebody is talking, and somebody's also listening. Isn't that an interesting way to think about it? And he said, we tend to think that we're the one talking, but we're actually the one listening. He said, you should think about the one who's talking like your roommate who drinks a lot and isn't really reliable in what they say. Or at least you have to exercise a great deal of discrimination. Just because that one is talking to me inside my head, you have to ask yourself, is what my drunken roommate telling me, is it really good advice? Is it really true? It's just very simple. Is this really true? Is this really helpful? Is this really going to take me anywhere that I really want to go? This is called the practice of honest introspection. And is it easy? Oh, heavens, no. But is living the way we are and imagining dying just as we are, that's not a very cheerful prospect either, is it? There has to just come a point where you realize, what choice do I have? Let me see what else. Now, this is another one is simply, and this is the curse of our age, which is romantic relationships. One of the things that happens when a civilization is falling apart, and I'm not just talking about your country, I'm talking about the whole planet. We are shifting from a lower age of matter into a higher age of energy. And these transitions are very tumultuous. And we are in a very tumultuous transition. The good news is that light is ascending. The bad news is that there's a lot of energy that wants the future to look like the past. And a lot of those who want the future to look like the past have a lot of power. But there's more power in those who are in tune with where we're going. But in the meantime, everything is very destabilized, as you all are experiencing. And one of the really profound destabilizations is in intimate partnerships and marriage. So first of all, it's nobody's fault. It's just that the form of things isn't there anymore. When I grew up, divorce was unheard of when I grew up, and now it's so common, nobody even comments about it. I don't know what the culture is here, but I know what it is in the USA. And we're all scattered and confused, so it's very difficult. It's part of the karma of this age, especially of the younger generation, that this natural expectation of life is a little dicier than it was. So, well, let me tell you a funny story. There was a woman in our community, and she was single, and she very much wanted to attract to herself a positive husband. So she read somewhere that she needed to make her visualization extremely precise. So she wrote out 3 pages of everything she wanted her husband to be, like this. And for reasons I don't know, although someday I will ask her, she thought it was a good idea to show this to Swami Kriyananda. So she presented it to him, and he dutifully read all 3 pages. And then he said to her with great compassion, "My dear," he said, "you want Jesus Christ for a husband." And then he said, as if, "I hate to be the one to break it to you, Jesus would not marry you. And even if he did, you would not be happy with him. You need someone who's a little closer to your level." Like that. So she respected Swamiji and had a good sense of humor. So she went home and she said, "I want a husband who loves God and who has a good sense of humor." And not very long after, she got one and just held on to him for decades now. And he loves God and he has a very good sense of humor. You know, the capacity to attract an appropriate partner to yourself is a question of your own vibrations. And vibrations are the net result of all of these vrittis. So every thought you're thinking is making you into a certain kind of person, or a certain radio signal, if you want to call it that, right? And those radio signals are complex. You know, you'll attract someone who is with whom you have karma, but karma is also unlearned lessons. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you will attract someone who will be perfectly harmonious and make you happy, but you will attract someone who is the appropriate situation. Just as I was saying before, if Divine Mother could take you there by any other route. But you will also attract someone who's somewhat on your wavelength. So everything I've just saying, you have to work with your wavelength. You have to become the kind of person that you would like to have as a partner. Because if you're not that kind of person, why would such another person want to be with you? I mean, it's perfectly logical. I'm just a weak, impossible person, and I want somebody who's really strong and really together to come and be with me. Why would they want to? They would want someone who's more like them. So the first thing you have to do is you have to become the person you would like to be with. And I've literally, because I have a very specific question, this is a suggestion I've made. In this case, write down all the things that you think are going to happen when this person finally comes into your life. And some of them you can't do without them. There's some of them that are dependent upon there being 2 of you, but many of them, it's just in your head that you think you can't do them. Because in this particular society, at this particular time, there's no guarantees. So are we going to spend our whole lives just standing on the edge, waiting for something to change before we change? Are we just going to say, I'm just going to do what I can? And that doesn't mean that the longing ever stops. It just means that it becomes part of the fabric of who we are, you know? And these are the things that happen to us. And then it comes back to, you know, what do I think this whole purpose of life is? Is it here just for me to get my little nest set up? Or am I here really to grow and change? And it's hard to realize that we have lots of incarnations, and this one is not as long as we think it is, but it seems long when we're in it. That's a fact. One of my friends, she died of cancer. She died very nobly and filled with grace. And in the last days of her life, she said to a friend, she said, I'm lying here, and as I lie here, thousands of faces are passing before my eyes. She was a very advanced soul, so I'm sure this is true. Thousands of faces are passing before my eyes, and I realized that every one of them was a full incarnation of mine. Yeah. She said, so it's hard to be real concerned about losing this one, you know. So there's a lot of days and nights in one lifetime, especially when you're grieving or lonely or deeply disappointed. I'm not making light of it. But how long do we just want to be paralyzed by what we lack. And then how can we just find, and the thing is to start really small. That's why I take care of the moments, do it one day at a time. Because if you can do it one day at a time, then what happens is you begin creating an entirely new pattern. And when you create a new pattern, then everything else around you begins to shift. Okay? Okay, Shiva, would you like to sing for us? Give us a couple of songs and then we'll call it an evening.